The keys on the piano felt cool beneath my fingers as I played the final notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The applause was polite, subdued, the kind wealthy patrons offered when they weren't really listening. I'd been playing at the Onyx for 3 months now, 6 nights a week, and I'd learned that most people came here for the ambiance, not the music. The piano was just another piece of expensive furniture, like the leather booths and the crystal chandeliers that cast everything in a golden glow. I stood from the bench, smoothing down my simple gray dress, and made my way toward the small backstage area that served as a green room. My calves ached from the heels I'd worn, a pair I'd found at a thrift store that looked decent enough under stage lighting, but pinched my toes mercilessly. The pay at the Onyx was good, better than the 2 other places I'd worked before Dylan found us, and I'd had to run again. But good pay still meant choosing between new shoes and Olivia's medication refills. Beautiful as always, Miss Foster. Marco, the floor manager, appeared beside me with a glass of water I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with kind eyes that had seen too much. Mr. Santoro asked me to tell you that he appreciated tonight's selection. I took the water, grateful. Mr. Santoro was here? He's here most nights. Marco glanced toward the back of the lounge, where a private section sat elevated above the main floor, separated by frosted glass panels that allowed occupants to see out, but prevented anyone from seeing in. He owns the place, after all. I'd known that, of course. Everyone who worked at the Onyx knew Christopher Santoro owned it, along with 6 other establishments throughout Manhattan. What they didn't talk about openly was what else he owned, what other business he conducted in rooms with frosted glass and men who wore weapons under tailored jackets. Well, I'm glad he enjoyed it. I set the empty glass down and reached for my coat, a thin thing that wouldn't do much against the November cold waiting outside. You're not taking a car? Marco's question held concern. It's late. I always take the subway. I pulled on my coat, already calculating the route. Train to Queens, 15-minute walk to the apartment, check on Olivia with Mrs. Park, the neighbor who watched her on nights I worked. Mrs. Park, who charged $20 a night. Money I could barely spare but had no choice about. Miss Foster. Marco lowered his voice, stepping closer. A woman alone at this hour, it's not safe. Mr. Santoro has drivers available for staff who work late shifts. I'm fine, Marco. Thank you. I slung my purse over my shoulder and headed for the service exit, the one that led to an alley instead of the main entrance where valets parked cars worth more than I'd earn in 5 years. The November air hit me like a slap. I pulled my coat tighter and walked quickly toward the subway station 3 blocks away, my breath forming small clouds in the cold. This was the part of the night I hated most. The walking alone through dark streets. The hypervigilance that never quite left me, even though I'd been in New York for 4 months, and Dylan hadn't found us yet. The apartment in Queens was silent when I finally pushed through the door at midnight. Mrs. Park met me in the narrow hallway, gathering her things. She had good night, Mrs. Park said in her accented English. Ate all her dinner, did homework, went to bed at 9. Any fever? I asked, handing her the $20 bill I'd folded into my pocket before leaving for work. No fever. She is good girl. Mrs. Park patted my arm with maternal affection that made my throat tight. You look tired, Megan. You work too much. I'm fine. The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. Thank you for watching her. After Mrs. Park left, I locked the door, checked the lock twice, then wedged the rubber doorstop underneath for good measure. Habits from a life I was trying to leave behind but couldn't quite escape. I moved quietly through the apartment, checking on Olivia in her small bedroom. She slept curled on her side, blonde curls spread across the pillow, her breathing deep and even. The sight of her peaceful face made something in my chest ache. 7 years old. She should be worrying about homework and cartoons, not lupus flares and hospital visits. But life didn't care about should. I retreated to the bathroom, the only place in the apartment where I could close a door and know I wouldn't wake her. The shower was barely warm, the hot water heater in this building unreliable at best. But I stood under the spray anyway, letting it wash away the smell of expensive cologne and cigar smoke that always clung to me after a night at the Onyx. When I finally stepped out, I caught my reflection in the mirror, 29 years old, but the face looking back at me seemed older, tired. My mother's eyes stared back at me, the same blue that Olivia had inherited, but lined now with exhaustion that no amount of concealer could hide. That's when the tears came, as they did most nights, silent, shoulders shaking, one hand pressed against my mouth to muffle any sound. I cried for Olivia's illness, for the $8,000 hospital bill that had arrived yesterday, for the experimental treatment her doctor recommended that insurance wouldn't cover. I cried for the piano career I'd abandoned, for the conservatory degree gathering dust in a storage unit somewhere in Boston, for the life I'd imagined before Dylan and his fists and his threats. And I cried because I was so tired, and there was no end in sight, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep all the pieces from falling apart. When the tears finally stopped, I washed my face with cold water, dried it with a threadbare towel, and went to bed. Tomorrow I had 3 private piano lessons scheduled in the afternoon before my evening shift at the Onyx, and I was supposed to finish transcribing sheet music for an online seller who paid $2 per page. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford to waste. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the building settling, sirens in the distance, the couple upstairs arguing in muffled Spanish. My mind ran through numbers, the same calculation I did every night. Rent, $1,800. Utilities, $200. Groceries, $300 if I was careful. Olivia's medications, $400. Mrs. Park, $400 a month. Student loan payment, $250. The hospital bill, $8,000 I didn't have. The Onyx paid $1,200 a week. Private lessons brought in maybe $400. Sheet music transcription another $200 if I worked fast. It still wasn't close to enough, especially not with the experimental lupus treatment Dr. Reeves had mentioned, the one that cost $15,000 and might give Olivia a chance at remission. $15,000. I might as well have been asked to fly to the moon. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room. Unknown number. My heart stuttered, fear immediate and visceral. Dylan. It had to be Dylan. He'd found us somehow, and now he'd start with the messages, then the calls, then he'd show up and I'd have to run again, uproot Olivia again, start over again in some new city with a new name and the same crushing exhaustion. But when I opened the message, it wasn't from Dylan. Your performance tonight was remarkable. The nocturne should always be played with feeling, not just technical precision. You understand that. C.S. Christopher Santoro. My employer had my personal number, and I had no memory of giving it to him. The realization should have frightened me. Should have sent up every red flag I'd learned to recognize after years with Dylan. Instead, I felt something else. Not quite relief, but close to it. Acknowledgement, maybe. Someone had actually listened to the music, not just heard it. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. Whatever this was, whatever attention I'd attracted from Christopher Santoro, it couldn't be anything good. Men with power were dangerous. I'd learned that lesson thoroughly, but as I finally drifted toward sleep, I couldn't quite shake the warmth that had bloomed in my chest at his words. Someone had listened. Someone had understood. It was a small thing, barely worth noting, yet I held on to it anyway, a tiny light in an otherwise overwhelming darkness. 3 days passed before I allowed myself to think about Christopher Santoro's message again. 3 days of the same exhausting routine. Wake at 6, make breakfast for Olivia, get her ready for school, take the subway to my first piano lesson in Manhattan, then the second, then the third, grab something cheap to eat, transcribe sheet music for 2 hours at a coffee shop where the Wi-Fi was free, then head to the Onyx for my evening shift. Play until midnight, take the subway home, check on Olivia, cry in the bathroom, sleep too little, repeat. On Thursday afternoon, between my second and third lesson, my phone rang. Dr. Reeves's office. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Miss Foster, this is Janet from Dr. Reeves's office. We have some concerns about Olivia's recent lab work. I stepped out of the coffee shop onto the sidewalk, pressing my free hand against my ear to block out the traffic noise. What kind of concerns? Her inflammation markers are elevated again, and her white blood cell count is dropping. Dr. Reeves would like to see Olivia today, if possible. Or first thing tomorrow morning. Today. I checked the time. 2:15. I had a lesson at 3, then my shift at the Onyx started at 7. If I canceled the lesson, I'd lose $80. If I called in sick to the Onyx, I'd lose $175. $255 I couldn't afford to lose. But Olivia's white blood cell count was dropping. I'll have her there by 4, I said, already calculating. Cancel the lesson, pick up Olivia from school, take a cab instead of the subway to save time, beg Marco to let me start my shift late. Perfect. We'll see you then. I called my student and apologized profusely, knowing I'd probably just lost a client. Then I called the school and arranged early pickup. Then I called Marco. I need to bring Olivia to a doctor's appointment. I can be there by 8 instead of 7. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marco's voice when it came was careful. You know Mr. Santoro prefers you to start at 7. The Thursday crowd comes in early. I know. I'm sorry. It's an emergency. My voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Another pause. Hold on. I waited, standing on the sidewalk while people flowed around me like water around a stone. After what felt like an eternity, Marco came back on the line. Mr. Santoro says to take care of your daughter. He'll cover the piano himself until you arrive. He plays? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Apparently. Marco's tone suggested he was as surprised as I was. Don't worry about the time, Miss Foster. Family comes first. I wanted to argue that I couldn't afford to miss an hour of pay, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I managed, Thank you. Tell him thank you. The appointment was worse than I'd feared. Dr. Reeves, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and gentle hands, examined Olivia thoroughly, while I sat in the plastic chair and tried not to let my daughter see how terrified I was. The lupus is progressing more aggressively than we hoped, Dr. Reeves said after Olivia had been sent to the waiting room with a nurse and a lollipop. The current medication regimen isn't controlling the inflammation adequately. We need to consider more aggressive treatment options, like the experimental treatment you mentioned before. I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yes. The monoclonal antibody therapy has shown remarkable results in pediatric lupus patients, particularly those with elevated inflammation markers like Olivia's. But I won't lie to you, Miss Foster. It's expensive. How expensive? $15,000 for the initial treatment course. After that, maintenance doses every 3 months at around $3,000 each. The numbers hit me like physical blows. $15,000. $3,000 every 3 months. $12,000 a year. Just for the experimental treatment, not counting her regular medications, doctor visits, lab work. How long before we need to make a decision? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. 2 weeks, maybe 3. After that, we risk permanent organ damage, particularly to her kidneys. Dr. Reeves leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. I know this is overwhelming. There are programs that might help with costs. Let me have my office manager give you some information. The office manager was kind and efficient and utterly useless. The programs she mentioned all had waiting lists of 6 months or more, or required income levels even lower than mine, or had already exhausted their funding for the year. I left the office with a folder full of pamphlets I'd never have time to read, and a prescription for a medication that would buy us a few more weeks at best. Olivia held my hand on the subway, unusually quiet. She knew something was wrong. 7 years old, and she'd already learned to read the tension in my shoulders, the tightness around my eyes. Are you sad, Mommy? She asked as we swayed with the movement of the train. Just tired, sweetheart. I squeezed her hand gently. But you're going to get better. I promise. It was a lie. I had no right to promise her anything when I couldn't even figure out how to pay for the treatment that might save her life. We stopped at the apartment long enough for me to get Olivia settled with Mrs. Park, who had agreed to come early after I'd texted her from the doctor's office. Then I was back on the subway, heading to Manhattan, to the Onyx, where I would play piano and pretend my world wasn't actively collapsing around me. I arrived at 7:45, slipping in through the service entrance and heading straight for the backstage area to drop off my coat and purse. The sound of piano music drifted from the main lounge. Classical technique, flawless execution, but somehow cold, missing the emotional depth that made music breathe. Marco found me before I could make it to the floor. "Mr. Santoro wants to see you in his office before you start your shift." My stomach knotted. Did I do something wrong? He didn't say. Just asked me to send you up when you arrived. Christopher Santoro's office was on the 3rd floor, accessible by a private elevator that required a keycard Marco provided. The doors opened onto a hallway with thick carpet that absorbed sound. Walls painted a deep charcoal gray, recessed lighting that cast everything in warm amber tones. A door at the end stood slightly ajar. I knocked anyway. "Come in." His office was larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, now glittering with evening lights. A massive desk dominated one side of the room, all dark wood and clean lines. But Christopher wasn't behind it. He stood near the windows, hands in his pockets, watching the city below. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He turned when I entered, and I got my first clear look at him beyond fleeting glimpses across a crowded lounge. Late 30s, dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it recently. Strong jawline shadowed with precisely maintained stubble. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the low lighting, and they fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Miss Foster, thank you for coming." His voice was exactly as I remembered from the one time I'd heard him speak to a client, low and controlled, with perfect diction that suggested expensive education. "Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair positioned in front of his desk. I sat, acutely aware of my wrinkled dress, my hair that had come loose from its bun during the frantic afternoon, the exhaustion that must be written clearly across my face. Christopher moved to his desk, but didn't sit. He leaned against it instead, arms crossed over his chest, studying me in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. Like he was reading a complex piece of music, trying to understand every note. "Marco tells me your daughter had a medical emergency," he said. "Not an emergency exactly. Just a checkup that couldn't wait. Is she all right?" The question, asked with what seemed like genuine concern, nearly undid me. I pressed my hands together in my lap, focusing on keeping my voice steady. "She has lupus. Juvenile onset. Today the doctor said the current treatment isn't working well enough. What does she need?" "A different treatment. More aggressive." I didn't mention the cost. That wasn't his concern, wasn't his problem. But Christopher's eyes narrowed slightly, like he'd heard what I didn't say. "And this treatment is expensive." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze never leaving my face. Then he moved around the desk and opened a drawer, removing a slim folder. He set it on the desk between us. "I had my people look into your situation after I hired you," he said, and something in my chest went cold. "Standard background check for all employees. I hope you understand." I did understand. I also understood that no standard background check would have revealed the depth of my financial situation unless he'd gone looking specifically for it. "What did you find?" My voice came out harder than I intended. "That you're drowning." He said it bluntly, without pity, which somehow made it easier to hear. 3 jobs, barely covering expenses. Student loans from a conservatory degree you never got to use. An ex-husband who left you with debt he accrued. A sick child and medical bills that grow faster than you can pay them. Each fact landed like a stone in my stomach. He knew everything. The loans, Dylan. Probably even the amount in my checking account, which currently sat at $237. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Christopher opened the folder and removed a check, sliding it across the desk toward me. I didn't want to look at it. Looked anyway. $8,000. The exact amount of the outstanding hospital bill that had arrived 3 days ago. "I don't take charity," I said immediately, even as something desperate inside me reached for that check like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. "It's not charity. It's a loan, an advance against your salary to be paid back over time through automatic deductions." His tone was businesslike, matter of fact. You'll also receive a raise, effective immediately, 25%. And I'm offering you a contract for private events, exclusive performances for my business associates. The pay is substantially higher than your current rate. I stared at him, trying to understand the angle, the trap I was walking into. Men like Christopher Santoro didn't offer help without expecting something in return. What do you want from me? Something flickered across his face. Amusement? Maybe. Or respect. Your talent. Your time. Your discretion about what you see and hear at these private events. Nothing more. I find that hard to believe. Believe what you want. He leaned back against the desk again, arms crossed. But your daughter needs treatment, and pride won't save her life. So you can accept my offer and give Olivia a chance, or you can refuse and continue drowning while convincing yourself you're maintaining your independence. The words were brutal in their accuracy. I wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right to judge my choices, to throw his check back in his face. But Olivia's face swam in my vision. Olivia, who deserved a childhood free from pain, who shouldn't have to grow up wondering if her mother's pride would cost her everything. Why do you care? I asked quietly. You don't know me. You don't know Olivia. Why does this matter to you? Christopher was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Let's just say I have an appreciation for talent being wasted by circumstances beyond someone's control. Your music deserves to be heard properly, not drowned out by financial desperation. Consider this an investment in that talent. It was a non-answer, but it was all I was going to get. I looked at the check again, at those numbers that represented breathing room, that represented Olivia's treatment, that represented selling some measure of my independence to a man I didn't understand. I'll want a contract, I said, something that specifies exactly what's expected of me. The terms of repayment, all of it in writing. A hint of satisfaction crossed his features. My lawyer will have something drawn up by tomorrow. In the meantime, take the check. Pay your bills. Get your daughter what she needs. I picked up the check with trembling fingers, folding it carefully and sliding it into my purse. The weight of it felt both liberating and terrifying. Thank you, I managed. Don't thank me yet. Christopher straightened, buttoning his cuffs with precise movements. You haven't seen the kind of events you'll be playing for. They're not like the regular Onyx crowd. I understand. And I did. On some level. Whatever business Christopher Santoro conducted behind frosted glass panels, whatever deals were made over expensive whiskey and carefully worded conversations, I would witness it. And I would play piano through all of it, invisible and necessary in equal measure. Good. Your first private event is tomorrow night. Marco will give you the details. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Miss Foster? Your daughter is lucky to have someone who fights so hard for her. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in his office with a check for $8,000 and the unsettling feeling that I'd just made a deal I didn't fully understand. But Olivia would get her treatment. That was all that mattered. Everything else I'd figure out as I went. 3 weeks had passed since I'd signed Christopher Santoro's contract. 3 weeks of depositing his check, scheduling Olivia's experimental treatment, and playing piano at events that confirmed everything I'd suspected about the nature of his business. The men who gathered in private rooms above the Onyx spoke in careful euphemisms. But I understood enough. Shipments, territories, problems that needed solving. I kept my eyes on the keys and my expression blank, exactly as the contract specified. The money helped more than I wanted to admit. With the hospital bill cleared and Olivia's first treatment dose scheduled for Monday, I'd been able to cut back on the transcription work and one of my private lessons. Not all of them. I wasn't foolish enough to put all my dependence on Christopher's arrangement, but enough that I could breathe slightly easier. Enough that I'd managed 3 full nights of sleep this week instead of my usual fragmented hours. Tonight was Friday, and my shift at the Onyx didn't start until 8. For once, I had an entire evening with Olivia, a luxury I hadn't experienced in months. We'd made spaghetti together, her standing on a stool to help me stir the sauce, chattering about her day at school and the art project she was making, watching her smile, seeing color in her cheeks that hadn't been there a month ago, made every compromise worth it. After dinner, we curled up on the couch with a book. Olivia tucked against my side while I read aloud. She was getting too old for picture books, really, but she still loved them, and I wasn't ready to give up this ritual. Outside, the November sky had opened up, unleashing a storm that drummed against the windows with increasing intensity. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Park, texting to cancel. Her grandson had gotten sick, and she needed to watch him tonight. I stared at the message, my mind already racing through options. There were no options. My other backup sitter had moved to New Jersey last month. I didn't know my neighbors well enough to ask them to watch a 7-year-old for 5 hours. And I couldn't afford to miss my shift, not when next week's paycheck needed to cover rent and the upcoming maintenance dose of Olivia's medication. I called Marco, hoping for a miracle. I know this is incredibly last minute, but is there any way I could bring Olivia with me tonight? My sitter just canceled, and I have no one else. Bring her to the Onyx? Marco's doubt was evident. Megan, you know that's not really appropriate. She'll stay in the green room. She has homework to do, and she's good at keeping herself occupied. Please, Marco. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. There was a long pause. Let me check with Mr. Santoro. I waited, watching Olivia color at the kitchen table, completely oblivious to the panic tightening my chest. When Marco called back, his tone was carefully neutral. Mr. Santoro says it's fine for tonight, but she stays in the green room, and you'll need to keep the door locked from the inside. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. I promise she won't be any trouble. Olivia was delighted by the unexpected adventure. She chattered the entire subway ride about how she'd never been to Mommy's work before. Wasn't it exciting? Would there be other kids there? I didn't have the heart to explain that the Onyx wasn't the kind of place where children belonged, that I was breaking some unspoken rule by bringing her into Christopher Santoro's world. We arrived at 7:50. Marco met us at the service entrance, his expression softening when he saw Olivia in her pink jacket, clutching her backpack full of homework and coloring books. This must be the famous Olivia, he said, crouching down to her level. Your mom talks about you all the time. Olivia beamed. She does? All the time. You're a very special little girl. Marco straightened, gesturing toward the back hallway. Come on, I'll show you where you can set up. The green room was small but comfortable, with a worn sofa, a coffee table, and a mini fridge that hummed quietly in the corner. I helped Olivia spread out her homework on the table, made sure she had water and the granola bars I'd packed, and kissed the top of her head. I'll be right out there playing piano. If you need anything, you come find Marco, okay? Don't wander around by yourself. Okay, Mommy. She was already absorbed in her math worksheet, pencil moving carefully across the page. I locked the door from the inside as Marco had instructed, then made my way to the piano. The Friday crowd was just starting to arrive, well-dressed men and women who moved with the confidence of money and influence. I settled onto the bench and began to play, losing myself in Debussy's Clair de Lune. An hour passed, then 2. During my break, I checked on Olivia. She'd finished her homework and moved on to coloring, humming quietly to herself. Everything was fine, except at 10:30, when I glanced toward the green room during a piece, the door stood open. My hands fumbled the notes, and I had to recover quickly before anyone noticed. The door was definitely open, and Olivia was definitely not visible inside. Panic seized my throat. I forced myself to finish the song, then stood and walked as calmly as I could toward the back hallway. Marco intercepted me before I'd gone 10 steps. Your daughter isn't in the green room. I know, I saw. Where is she? My voice came out higher than intended. I don't know. I was helping the bartender with something, and when I came back to check on her, the door was open and she was gone. Marco's professional composure had cracked, revealing genuine worry beneath. I've got people looking, but we haven't found her yet. How long has she been missing? The room tilted slightly, and I grabbed Marco's arm to steady myself. 10 minutes, maybe 15. 15 minutes. Olivia had been wandering around the Onyx alone for 15 minutes. A bar frequented by criminals, by dangerous men, by people who wouldn't hesitate to use a child if they saw an advantage in it. I'd brought her here. I'd locked her in a room and left her alone, and now she was gone. I need to find her. I started toward the main lounge, but Marco caught my shoulder. Let security handle it. They know the building better than you do. She's my daughter. I pulled free, moving into the crowded lounge. The piano sat abandoned, and a few patrons glanced at me curiously, but I didn't care. I wove between tables, checking behind the bar, in the coat room, near the restrooms. Nothing. I was about to check the kitchen when I heard it. A child's voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the private elevator, the one that led to Christopher's third-floor office. My heart stopped. I ran toward the sound, taking the stairs 2 at a time since I didn't have a key card for the elevator. The third-floor hallway was empty, except for 2 security guards who looked startled by my appearance. I didn't slow down, didn't explain, just pushed past them toward Christopher's office. The door was open. Inside, I could see Olivia standing near the massive desk, talking animatedly to someone I couldn't see from this angle. I burst through the door, ready to apologize, to grovel, to do whatever it took to keep Christopher from being angry about this intrusion. But the scene that greeted me stopped me cold. Christopher Santoro sat on the floor, actually sat on the expensive hardwood, his back against the front of his desk, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. And beside him, cross-legged and gesturing with her hands as she spoke, was Olivia. They both looked up when I entered. Olivia's face lit up. "Mommy, look, I found Mr. Christopher. He was up here all alone and that's sad, so I came to keep him company." I couldn't form words. Christopher met my eyes, and I braced for anger, for coldness, for some indication that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Instead, his expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "I'm so sorry," I managed finally. "She was supposed to stay in the green room. I don't know how she got out or how she found the elevator. I'll take her home right now. It's all right, Miss Foster." Christopher's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Olivia was just telling me about her art project. She's very talented." Olivia beamed at the praise, then looked back at Christopher with complete trust. "He said he likes sunflowers too. That's what I'm painting for art class." I looked between them, trying to understand this strange tableau. The city's most dangerous man, sitting on the floor with my 7-year-old daughter, discussing sunflowers. "Olivia, sweetheart, we need to let Mr. Santoro get back to work." I extended my hand. "Come on." "But I haven't asked him yet." Olivia turned to Christopher, her expression suddenly serious. "Can you help my mommy stop crying at night?" The question hit like a physical blow. I felt blood drain from my face. "Olivia, that's not appropriate." My voice came out strangled. But Christopher was looking at my daughter with an intensity that made me nervous. "Your mother cries at night?" "Every night." Olivia nodded solemnly. "After she puts me to bed, I hear her in the bathroom. She tries to be quiet, but I can still hear. She's always sad. And I don't know how to make it better." Shame washed over me. I'd thought I'd been so careful, so quiet. I'd thought I was protecting her from my pain, from my fear, from all the weight I carried. But she'd known all along. "Olivia." My voice cracked. "We should go." Christopher stood in one fluid motion, all controlled power and grace. He crossed the room to where a bottle of water sat on a side table, then crouched down to Olivia's level, offering it to her. "Why don't you wait right here for a minute? I need to talk to your mother about something." Olivia took the water bottle, sitting down on the leather chair with perfect trust. Christopher gestured for me to follow him into the hallway. I did, numb and mortified. Once the door was closed behind us, he turned to face me. The neutral expression was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. "How long has she known?" he asked quietly. I didn't realize she knew at all. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. I thought I was being careful. Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. He was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "Why were you crying?" "That's not your concern." "I made it my concern when I hired you." His voice was firmer now. "When I gave you that loan, when I brought you into my world. So I'll ask again. Why were you crying?" I wanted to tell him it was none of his business, that my private pain wasn't part of our contract. But standing there in that hallway, with my daughter's innocent question still echoing in my ears, I found I didn't have the energy to deflect. "Because I'm terrified," I admitted. "Because even with your help, even with the treatment starting Monday. I don't know if it'll be enough. Because Olivia is 7 years old, and she's already had to grow up too fast, and I can't fix it. Because every night I lie awake calculating numbers that don't add up, and I don't know what happens when the money runs out again. Christopher listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finally stopped talking, he reached out and did something completely unexpected. He touched my shoulder, just a brief contact, but the gesture carried surprising gentleness. The treatment will help. Dr. Reeves is one of the best pediatric rheumatologists in the country. And the money will be there, because I'll make sure it's there. He dropped his hand but held my gaze. You don't have to carry all of this alone anymore, Megan. It was the first time he'd used my first name. The sound of it, in that low, controlled voice, made something in my chest tighten. Why are you doing this? I asked, for what felt like the 100th time. Really? Not the talent excuse. Not the investment story. Why do you care? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said very quietly, because I understand what it's like to feel helpless while someone you love suffers, and I have the power to prevent that for you. So I will. Before I could respond, the door opened and Olivia peeked out. Can I go back to my coloring now? I want to finish the picture I was working on. Christopher's expression softened in a way I'd never seen before. Of course. Marco will take you back to your room and make sure the door locks properly this time. As Olivia skipped down the hallway with Marco, who'd apparently been waiting nearby, Christopher turned back to me. Finish your shift. Take Olivia home. Sleep without crying tonight. It wasn't quite a command, but close. That's an order from your employer. I don't think that's how employment works. The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. In my world, it's exactly how it works. He disappeared back into his office, leaving me standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. But as I returned to the piano and resumed playing, I realized two things. First, Christopher Santoro was far more complicated than I'd given him credit for. And second, despite every warning bell in my head, despite every lesson learned from Dylan, despite knowing better, I was starting to trust him. Whether that would save me or destroy me remained to be seen. Monday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind that made New York look almost cheerful despite the lingering cold. I'd taken the day off from everything, my lessons, the transcription work, even my regular shift at the Onyx. Christopher had insisted when I'd mentioned Olivia's first treatment, his tone leaving no room for argument. Today was about my daughter, nothing else. We sat in Dr. Reeves's office, Olivia swinging her legs from the examination table while the doctor explained the procedure one more time. I'd heard it all before during our consultation 2 weeks ago, but I listened again anyway, searching for reassurance in the clinical details. The monoclonal antibody targets specific immune cells that are causing the inflammation, Dr. Reeves said, her gentle voice directed at Olivia as much as me. It's going to help your body stop attacking itself. The infusion takes about 2 hours, and you might feel a little sleepy afterward, but most kids tolerate it very well. Will it hurt? Olivia asked, her voice small. You'll feel a little pinch when we put in the IV, but after that, you won't feel anything. You can watch movies the whole time if you want. Olivia looked at me, seeking confirmation that this was okay, that she could trust this. I squeezed her hand and forced myself to smile with more confidence than I felt. It's going to help you feel better, sweetheart. That's all that matters. The infusion room was surprisingly comfortable, with recliners instead of hospital beds and large windows that let in natural light. A nurse helped Olivia settle into one of the chairs, wrapping her in warm blankets and setting up a tablet loaded with her favorite animated movies. The IV insertion made her wince, but she was brave about it, only letting out a small whimper before squeezing her eyes shut. All done with the hard part, the nurse said cheerfully, taping the IV in place. Now you just get to relax and watch your show. I pulled a chair close to Olivia's recliner and held her free hand while the medication began to drip slowly through the line. Dr. Reeves had warned me that some children experienced reactions, fever or nausea or rashes, but that most tolerated it well. I watched Olivia's face obsessively, looking for any sign of distress, but she seemed content enough, her attention already captured by the bright colors on the screen. An hour into the infusion, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I checked it carefully, always wary now of communications from people I didn't recognize. How was she doing? CS Christopher. I'd given Marco my schedule for the day, mentioning the appointment. But I hadn't expected Christopher himself to follow up. For a moment, I considered not responding. This was private, personal, none of his business despite the fact that he was funding it. But something about the simple question, the implied concern behind it, made me type back. Doing well so far. She's watching movies and being very brave. The response came almost immediately. Good. Take as much time as you need. The Onyx will survive without you for one night. I stared at the message, unsure how to interpret it. Was he being genuinely kind? Or was this just good management, keeping his investment secure? With Christopher, it was impossible to tell. Every interaction felt layered with meanings I couldn't quite parse. Olivia fell asleep during the second hour, her hand going slack in mine. The nurse assured me this was normal, that the medication often made children drowsy. I sat and watched her breathe, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, and felt the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach begin to loosen slightly. She was here. She was receiving treatment. She had a chance. When the infusion finally finished, Dr. Reeves came to check on us. She examined Olivia thoroughly, took her vital signs, and nodded with satisfaction. Everything looks good. No signs of reaction. I want you to monitor her closely for the next 24 hours, especially for fever or unusual fatigue. But I'm optimistic. She turned to me, her expression warm. You did the right thing, pursuing this treatment. I know it wasn't an easy decision financially. I had help, I admitted, not wanting to take credit I didn't deserve. Well, whoever helped made it possible for your daughter to have a real shot at remission. That's not nothing. We took a cab home instead of the subway. Another luxury I'd allowed myself for today. Olivia dozed against my shoulder the entire ride, and I kept my arm around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. By the time we reached our building, she was awake again and asking about dinner. How about I make your favorite? Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Can we add the fancy cheese you got last time? Olivia asked hopefully. We can add whatever cheese you want. That evening, after Olivia had eaten and we'd settled on the couch for a movie, my phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. Christopher's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. How is she? His voice was quieter than usual, less commanding. Sleeping soundly. The infusion went well. No complications. I kept my voice low, not wanting to wake Olivia, who was curled against me. Good. A pause. I need to speak with you about something. Not tonight. You should rest. But soon. My stomach tightened. What is it? Nothing bad, he said quickly, reading my tension. A proposition. But it needs to be discussed in person, where we can't be overheard. Christopher, if this is about renegotiating the contract, I'm not sure I can handle more obligations right now. It's not about the contract. It's about your safety, yours and Olivia's. His tone had shifted, become more serious. I received some information today that concerns me. Information about your ex-husband. Ice flooded my veins. Dylan? What about him? Not over the phone. Can you come to my office tomorrow evening? Bring Olivia if you need to. I'll make sure she's entertained. I wanted to demand answers immediately, to know what information he'd received and why it concerned my safety. But I also recognized the wisdom in his caution. Phone calls could be intercepted, recorded, overheard. What time? 6. Marco will make sure you can come straight up. After we hung up, I sat in the dark apartment with Olivia warm against my side and tried to quell the rising panic. Dylan. I'd been so careful, had covered my tracks when I left Boston, had used cash for the security deposit on this apartment, had kept my phone number unlisted. How had he found us? And more importantly, what did Christopher know about it? Sleep eluded me that night despite Christopher's earlier order. I lay awake running through scenarios, each more frightening than the last. Dylan showing up at Olivia's school. Dylan waiting outside the Onyx. Dylan breaking into our apartment while we slept. I'd left him because his controlling behavior had escalated into something darker, something that made me fear for my safety and Olivia's. The final straw had been the night he'd grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, screaming about money I'd spent on Olivia's medication without asking his permission first. I'd packed our things the next day while he was at work and disappeared, 4 months ago, and I'd thought we were safe. Apparently I'd been wrong. Tuesday evening, I dressed Olivia in her favorite purple sweater and took her with me to the Onyx as Christopher had suggested. Marco met us at the service entrance, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes concerned. "Mr. Santoro is expecting you." "I'll take Olivia to the green room. We've set up some new art supplies for her." "I get new art supplies?" Olivia's face lit up, momentarily dispelling my anxiety. "Mr. Santoro thought you might like them," Marco said, smiling at her enthusiasm. I watched them disappear down the hallway, then took the elevator to the 3rd floor. My hands were trembling slightly as I walked toward Christopher's office. The door stood open, and he was waiting inside, standing by the windows as he often seemed to do. He turned when I entered, and I was struck again by the controlled intensity he carried with him. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, the first time I'd seen him looking even slightly casual. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to the sitting area, 2 leather chairs positioned near a low table. "Please, sit." I sat, my spine rigid with tension. "What information did you receive about Dylan?" Christopher settled into the chair across from me, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. "My people keep tabs on certain individuals who might pose a threat to my business or my associates. You became an associate when you signed my contract. As part of that, I had them run periodic checks on your ex-husband, just to ensure he wasn't becoming a problem. And he's become a problem. It wasn't a question. He's been making inquiries. Discreet ones, but inquiries nonetheless. He hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago, someone with a reputation for finding people who don't want to be found. The investigator tracked you to New York and has been narrowing down the area. It's only a matter of time before he pinpoints this neighborhood." The room tilted slightly. "How much time?" "A week. Maybe 2 if we're lucky." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the fear coursing through me. I have to leave. Take Olivia somewhere else. Start over again. That's one option. Christopher's voice remained calm. "It's also a temporary solution. He found you once. He'll find you again. Men like Dylan don't stop until they're forced to stop." "Then what do you suggest?" I turned to face him, anger mixing with fear. "I can't fight him. I don't have the resources, the connections. I'm just trying to keep my daughter safe and healthy." Christopher stood, closing the distance between us in 3 strides. He stopped just short of touching me, but I could feel the heat radiating from him. "You let me handle Dylan. Permanently." The word hung between us, heavy with implication. I understood what he was offering, what he was capable of doing. "I can't ask you to do that." My voice came out whisper soft. "You're not asking. I'm offering. But it comes with conditions." "Of course it does." Bitterness crept into my tone. "What do you want?" "You and Olivia move into a secure apartment. One I own, with proper security. Not the building you're in now with its broken buzzer and inadequate locks. Somewhere I can guarantee your safety. You want us to live in one of your properties." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. "Under your control. Under my protection," he corrected firmly. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm trading one controlling man for another." His jaw tightened, the first sign of real emotion breaking through his controlled facade. "I am nothing like your ex-husband. I don't hurt women. I don't terrorize children. And I sure as hell don't make people afraid in their own homes. But you do expect something in return for your help. You always do." "Yes, I expect something." He moved to his desk and pulled out a folder, identical to the one he'd shown me 3 weeks ago. He opened it, revealing a document. A new contract. Higher pay, better benefits, and a clause that guarantees housing and security for you and Olivia for as long as you work for me. In exchange, you continue playing at my events, you maintain discretion about what you see and hear, and you accept that you're under my protection. I stared at the contract, trying to find the trap hidden in the words. What happens when I don't want to work for you anymore? When I want to leave? Then you give me 3 months' notice, and I arrange new housing and security for you somewhere else. The protection doesn't end just because the employment does. He met my eyes, and for once his expression was completely open. I take care of what's mine, Megan. And whether you like it or not, you became mine the moment you walked into this place 3 months ago. I'm not a possession. No, you're not. You're a woman with a daughter who deserves to live without fear, and I have the power to make that happen. So the question is, are you going to let your pride put Olivia at risk? Or are you going to accept help from someone who actually wants to help you? The words hit too close to what he'd said before, echoing the same brutal honesty. I looked at the contract, at the neat paragraphs outlining terms that seemed almost too good to be true, and then I looked at Christopher Santoro, really looked at him, past the expensive clothes and the dangerous reputation, trying to understand what he actually wanted from this arrangement. Why do you care? I asked one more time. The real reason? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, very softly, because I had a sister once. She was 7 years old when she got sick. Leukemia. We didn't have money for the treatments she needed. And by the time I earned enough to pay for them, it was too late. She died at 8 years old, and I've spent every day since then making sure I never feel that helpless again. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I saw the pain behind his carefully controlled expression, the old grief he carried, and suddenly everything made sense. The immediate interest in my situation, the assistance with Olivia's treatment, the fierce protectiveness that seemed out of proportion to our professional relationship. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Don't be sorry. Just let me help you the way I couldn't help her. He picked up a pen and held it out to me. Sign the contract, Megan. Let me take care of this problem so you can focus on Olivia getting better. I took the pen with trembling fingers. Every warning bell in my head was screaming that this was a mistake, that accepting this much help from someone like Christopher Santoro would bind me to him in ways I couldn't predict. But I thought about Dylan hiring investigators, about the inevitability of him finding us, about what would happen when he did, and I thought about Olivia, who deserved a childhood free from fear and illness both. I signed my name at the bottom of the contract. Christopher took the document, his expression revealing nothing, but his eyes held something that might have been relief. I'll have the apartment ready by tomorrow. Marco will arrange the move. You don't have to do anything except pack what you want to keep. What are you going to do about Dylan? I had to know, even if the answer terrified me. What needs to be done? He won't hurt you again. That's all you need to know. It should have horrified me, the casual way he spoke about eliminating a threat. But all I felt was exhausted relief. Someone else was carrying the weight for once. Someone stronger, more capable, more willing to do what was necessary. Thank you, I said quietly. Christopher stepped closer, reaching out to touch my shoulder the way he had days before. You don't have to thank me. Just keep playing piano and take care of your daughter. Everything else is handled. When I collected Olivia from the green room an hour later, she was covered in paint and grinning from ear to ear. She chattered the entire cab ride home about the art supplies Mr. Christopher had given her, about how nice Marco was, about how the Onyx was becoming her favorite place. I held her close and wondered what I'd just agreed to, what consequences would unfold from signing that contract. But for tonight, with my daughter safe and happy in my arms, I chose not to worry about the future. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its complications and promises. Tonight, I just held on to what mattered most. 2 months had passed since Olivia's first treatment, and the change in her was nothing short of miraculous. The constant fatigue that had shadowed her for over a year had lifted. She had energy to run and play after school, to stay awake past 8 o'clock, to be a normal 7-year-old. Dr. Reeves was cautiously optimistic, her inflammation markers dropping with each blood test, the medication doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The apartment Christopher had moved us into was in a completely different world from our previous place in Queens. Upper West Side, 23rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of Central Park. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with appliances that actually worked. Olivia had her own room for the first time in her life, painted a soft lavender at her request, filled with the art supplies Christopher kept providing despite my protests. Security was discreet but omnipresent. A doorman who knew our names and faces, cameras in every hallway, a building manager who Christopher clearly had an understanding with. I'd met 2 of the other residents, both polite but distant, the kind of people who respected privacy because they valued their own. Living here should have felt like victory, like we'd finally caught a break. Instead, I felt increasingly like I was inhabiting someone else's life. The furniture was beautiful but not mine. The view was stunning, but not earned. Even the safety felt borrowed, dependent on Christopher's continued goodwill. I'd kept my remaining private piano lesson, the one with Mrs. Hartley on Thursday afternoons. She was 72, partially blind, and still played with more passion than most conservatory students. I needed that lesson for myself, needed one piece of my professional life that existed outside Christopher's influence. The transcription work I'd stopped entirely. There simply wasn't time with my expanded schedule at the Onyx. The private events Christopher hired me for had increased in frequency. 2 or 3 times a week now, I'd play in rooms full of dangerous men conducting dangerous business. I'd learned to recognize the hierarchies, the power dynamics, the subtle threats disguised as friendly conversation. And I'd learned that Christopher commanded respect that bordered on fear, even among people who weren't easily intimidated. Tonight was one of those private events, held in a different venue entirely. Christopher owned a restaurant in Tribeca called Luciano's, and twice a month he hosted dinners there for what Marco carefully termed international business associates. I'd been playing at these dinners for the past month, positioned near enough to provide ambiance but far enough to seem invisible. Marco had picked me up at 6, as had become routine. Olivia was with a new babysitter, a woman named Sarah, who Christopher's people had apparently vetted extensively. Sarah was in her 40s, former nurse, lived 2 floors down in our building. Olivia adored her, which made accepting this particular arrangement easier. The restaurant was already busy when I arrived. Regular dinner service in full swing on the main floor. But I was directed to the private dining room on the 2nd level, accessible only by a separate staircase that was monitored by 2 men who nodded to me in recognition. The room was smaller than the private spaces at the Onyx, more intimate. A single long table dominated the center, already set with crystal and china that caught the candlelight. The piano was a baby grand positioned in the corner, its rich mahogany finish gleaming. I'd played this particular instrument before and loved it. Whoever had selected it understood quality. I was early, as Christopher preferred. It gave me time to warm up, to test the room's acoustics, to settle my nerves before the guests arrived. I'd just finished running through scales when Christopher entered through the main door. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the empty room. He wore charcoal gray tonight, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair styled with precision that suggested recent attention. But there was tension in his shoulders I'd learned to recognize, the kind that meant tonight's dinner was more important than usual. "You're here early," he said, moving toward the table to inspect the place settings. "You prefer me to be ready before guests arrive." "I do." He adjusted a water glass that was already perfectly positioned, then turned to face me. "Tonight's dinner is with representatives from several organizations. Some are allies. Some are potential problems. It's important that everything goes smoothly. You're telling me this because—" I kept my hands in my lap, resisting the urge to fidget. "Because if anything seems off, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, I want you to signal Marco immediately." His expression had gone hard, protective in a way that still caught me off guard. These men know better than to approach my employees inappropriately, but I don't take chances. "I'll be fine, Christopher. I've been doing this for 2 months now." "I know." But he didn't look reassured. "Just stay alert." The guests began arriving at 7:30. I recognized a few faces from previous events at the Onyx, but most were new. They spoke in Italian, Russian, and accented English, their conversations flowing around me while I played. Chopin tonight, technically demanding pieces that required enough concentration to keep me from processing most of what I overheard. Dinner was served in courses, each plate a work of art that suggested Christopher took his restaurant operations seriously. Wine flowed freely, voices grew louder, and the atmosphere shifted from formal to almost convivial. I played through it all, invisible as always. It was during the 3rd course that I became aware of someone watching me. Not casually, the way people sometimes glanced at the piano, but with focused attention. I looked up from the keys and met the gaze of a man seated at the far end of the table, older than Christopher, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed me like I was a problem to be solved. He said something to the man beside him, too quietly for me to hear over the music and conversation. But I saw Christopher's posture change, saw him lean forward slightly with an expression that could freeze blood. The silver-haired man stood, excusing himself from the table. He walked toward me, and every instinct screamed to stop playing, to move away, to do something other than sit there vulnerable and exposed. But I kept my hands moving across the keys, kept my expression neutral, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. He stopped beside the piano, close enough that I could smell expensive cologne and something metallic beneath it. "You play beautifully," he said in heavily accented English. "How long have you worked for Santoro?" I glanced toward Christopher, saw him halfway out of his chair, saw Marco moving toward us from his position by the door. The silver-haired man followed my gaze and smiled, a predatory expression that made my skin crawl. "I'm just making conversation," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No harm intended. Miss Foster is concentrating." Christopher's voice cut across the room, quiet but absolute in its authority. "I'm sure you understand that pianists don't appreciate being disturbed during performance." The silver-haired man inclined his head, but his eyes never left my face. "Of course. My apologies." He returned to the table, but I felt his attention on me for the rest of the evening, an uncomfortable weight I couldn't shake. The dinner finally ended near midnight. Guests departed in groups, some heading to cars waiting outside, others lingering to continue conversations in the restaurant's bar. The silver-haired man was among the last to leave, pausing at the door to speak with Christopher in Italian. I caught only fragments, something about territory and agreements, but the tension between them was palpable. After the last guest had gone, Christopher dismissed Marco and the other security, then turned to me. I was gathering my bag, eager to get home to Olivia and the safety of our apartment. "I'm sorry about Victor," Christopher said, moving toward me. He was testing boundaries he had no right to test. "Victor?" The name meant nothing to me. "Victor Volkov. He runs operations in Brighton Beach. We have an understanding, but he enjoys pushing limits." Christopher's jaw tightened. "He won't approach you again. Is he dangerous?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Everyone at that table was dangerous. That's why I need you to be careful, to stay alert. He studied my face, his expression concerned. "Are you all right? He didn't threaten you?" "No threats, just uncomfortable attention." I shouldered my bag, suddenly exhausted. Is this what the job is now? Playing piano while dangerous men decide whether or not to respect your rules? This is what the job has always been. You've just become more visible. He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "If this is too much, if you want out of the private events, say so. I'll adjust the contract." I almost laughed. "And lose the income that's paying for Olivia's treatment? No, I'll manage." "Megan." He said my name like it cost him something. "The treatment is covered regardless of whether you work private events. I told you, I take care of what's mine. I'm not yours." The protest came automatically, but even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. I lived in his apartment, earned my living from his businesses, relied on his protection. How much of my life belonged to me anymore? "Aren't you?" He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "You signed a contract that says otherwise. That contract is about employment, not ownership. Tell yourself that if it makes you feel better." His hand lingered near my face, thumb brushing against my cheekbone. "But we both know this stopped being just business weeks ago." My breath caught. He was right. Had been right for a while now. The way I found myself thinking about him during quiet moments. The way my pulse quickened when he entered a room. The way I trusted him despite every lesson learned from Dylan. This had become personal, complicated, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with criminal enterprises. "Christopher, I meant it as a warning, as a reminder of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, but his name came out softer than intended, almost an invitation." He leaned down, giving me time to pull away, to protest, to remind him of the power imbalance between us. I did none of those things. His lips touched mine, gentle at first. Testing. Then deeper, his hand sliding into my hair, his other arm pulling me close. I responded without thinking, my hands finding the lapels of his jacket, holding him to me. The kiss was nothing like Dylan's had been. Dylan's kisses had always carried demands, expectations, the implicit threat of consequences if I didn't respond correctly. Christopher kissed me like he was learning me, memorizing the taste and feel of me, giving as much as he took. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless and trembling. Christopher rested his forehead against mine, his breathing as uneven as my own. "This is a mistake," I whispered. "Probably." He didn't move away. Does it feel like a mistake? It didn't. That was the problem. Being in Christopher's arms felt safe and dangerous and absolutely right, all at the same time. But mixing business with personal attachment never ended well, and I had Olivia to think about. Responsibilities that went beyond my own wants. "I need to get home," I said, forcing myself to step back. "Sarah's probably wondering where I am." Christopher let me go, but his eyes held promise of unfinished conversation. "Marco's waiting to drive you. I'll see you tomorrow night at the Onyx." "Tomorrow night," I agreed, then fled before I could change my mind and return to his arms. In the car, I pressed my fingers to my lips, still feeling the pressure of his kiss. Marco glanced at me in the rearview mirror but said nothing, his expression carefully neutral. He'd probably seen this pattern before, women who got involved with Christopher Santoro and paid prices I couldn't yet imagine. But as we drove through Manhattan's late-night streets, I couldn't bring myself to regret what had happened. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than fear and exhaustion. I felt alive, wanted, seen. Whatever consequences came from this, I'd face them when they arrived. For tonight, I'd allow myself this one moment of happiness, this one taste of something that might be dangerous but felt remarkably like hope. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Christopher and I had kissed in the private dining room at Luciano's. We hadn't discussed what had happened, hadn't repeated it, but the awareness hummed between us constantly now. Every glance carried weight. Every accidental touch sparked electricity. I was at Mrs. Hartley's apartment for our weekly lesson when my phone vibrated insistently in my bag. I ignored it the first time, focused on demonstrating a particularly tricky fingering technique. But when it rang again immediately, Mrs. Hartley waved me toward it. "Answer, dear. No one calls twice unless it's important." It was Sarah, the babysitter, and her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Megan, I need you to come home right now. Don't panic, but there's a situation." My heart stopped. "Is Olivia okay?" "She's fine. She's with me. But there's a man downstairs claiming to be her father. The doorman won't let him up, but he's refusing to leave and he's making a scene. He says he has rights. Dylan. Christopher had promised Dylan wouldn't be a problem, had said he'd handled it. But apparently, he hadn't handled it thoroughly enough. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep the door locked and don't let anyone in except me." I was already gathering my things, mouthing an apology to Mrs. Hartley, who nodded understanding. "Should I call the police?" Sarah asked. "No, not yet. I'm calling someone else." The last time I'd tried to explain Dylan to anyone with a badge, they'd believed his easy charm over my bruised fear. I couldn't risk him turning this into a story where I was the unreasonable one. Christopher wouldn't ask for a statement. He'd simply make the problem go away. I hung up and immediately dialed Christopher. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Megan." "What's wrong?" "Dylan's at my building. He found us." The words came out steadier than I felt. "He's downstairs demanding to see Olivia." Silence on the other end, but I could feel the rage building through the phone line. When Christopher finally spoke, his voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Stay on the phone with me. Get to your building as fast as you can. I'm sending people now, and I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Christopher, what are you going to do?" "What I should have done the first time. Wait for me before you go inside." The cab ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Christopher stayed on the phone the entire time, his presence somehow reassuring despite the distance. He asked questions, clinical and precise. How had Dylan known where we lived? Had he approached Sarah or Olivia directly? Had he made any threats? I didn't have answers to most of them. All I knew was that the safety I'd been promised, the protection I'd accepted in exchange for my independence, had failed. Dylan had found us, and now he was close enough to hurt Olivia. When the cab pulled up to our building, I saw the scene immediately. Dylan stood on the sidewalk, gesturing angrily at the doorman who blocked the entrance with crossed arms. My ex-husband looked almost exactly as I remembered. Sandy brown hair, athletic build, the charming face that hid so much cruelty. But there was something different now. A desperation in his movements that made him seem smaller somehow. 2 large men flanked the building entrance, and I recognized them as Christopher's security. They weren't engaging with Dylan, just standing there as silent barriers. The doorman looked relieved when he saw me approaching. "Miss Foster, I'm so sorry about this. I tried to explain that you weren't available, but he insisted on waiting." Dylan's head snapped toward me, his expression cycling through relief, anger, and something I couldn't quite identify. He took a step forward, and Christopher's men shifted positions subtly, placing themselves between us. "Megan." Dylan's voice carried that familiar tone, the one that used to make me flinch. "Finally. I've been trying to reach you for months. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." I kept my distance, my phone still in my hand. Christopher was still on the line, listening. "You need to leave. I have a right to see my daughter." Dylan's jaw clenched, and I saw the first hints of the temper I'd fled from. "You can't just take her and disappear. That's kidnapping. I left because you were abusive. I have full custody. You have no rights here." "Abusive?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "I provided for you. I gave you everything, and you repaid me by stealing my child. She's not your child. You signed away parental rights 2 years ago, when you didn't want to pay child support." The lie came smoothly, born from months of fear. Dylan had never officially been Olivia's father. He'd been in our lives for 2 years, had acted like a father when it suited him, but there were no legal ties binding him to her. Dylan's face darkened. "That's not true. And you know it. Leave, Dylan, or I'll have you arrested for harassment." "By who? These thugs?" He gestured at Christopher's security. "I know what you're doing, Megan. I know who you're working for now. Christopher Santoro, right? The mob boss? You think he's better than me? You think he won't hurt you eventually?" A black car pulled up to the curb, and Christopher emerged before it had fully stopped. He moved with purpose, buttoning his jacket as he approached. Dylan's bravado faltered visibly when he saw him. Christopher stopped beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. His presence radiated controlled danger, the kind that didn't need to be announced. "You must be Dylan." Christopher's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I've heard a great deal about you. And you're Santoro." Dylan tried to match his confidence, but fell short. "The man who's been keeping my family from me." "Your family?" Christopher's eyebrow raised fractionally. "That's an interesting claim, considering you have no legal relationship to the child in question and a documented history of domestic violence." "I never hit her." "No. You just grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises, screamed at her until she was afraid to speak, controlled every dollar she spent and every decision she made. That's not violence?" Christopher's tone remained pleasant, but something lethal lurked beneath it. "Let me be very clear about something, Dylan. Megan and Olivia are under my protection. That means if you come near them again, if you contact them in any way, if you even think about them too loudly, I will know. And you won't like what happens next." Dylan swallowed hard, his face flushing. "You can't threaten me. I'll go to the police." "Please do. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the outstanding warrant for credit card fraud in Massachusetts, or the unpaid child support from your first marriage, or the restraining order your ex-girlfriend filed last year that you violated 3 times. Christopher smiled, cold and humorless. "I did my research, Dylan. You're not nearly as clean as you'd like Megan to believe." I stared at Christopher, shocked by the thoroughness of his investigation. Dylan's face had gone pale, confirming every accusation. "How did you—" Dylan started, then stopped. "I have resources. I use them to protect what's mine." Christopher's hand found the small of my back, a possessive gesture that Dylan couldn't miss. "Now, you have 2 choices. You can leave New York voluntarily and never contact Megan or Olivia again. Or you can refuse, and I'll make sure every piece of information I've gathered finds its way to the appropriate authorities. Your choice. You can't do this. I absolutely can. The question is whether you're smart enough to accept the deal. Christopher's expression hardened. You have until the count of 10 to start walking. 1. Dylan looked at me desperate. Megan, please. You can't let him do this. 2. I just want to talk to you. That's all. Just 5 minutes. 3. I met Dylan's gaze and felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, no lingering attachment, just cold certainty that he needed to be gone. You should leave, I said quietly, while you still can. 4. Dylan backed away, his hands raised. This isn't over. You can't keep me away forever. 5. Christopher's men stepped forward. Dylan finally broke, turning and half running down the sidewalk toward the subway station. We watched him disappear around the corner, and only then did Christopher lower his count. He'll be gone by tonight, Christopher said, his voice returning to normal. I'm having him escorted to the bus station with a one-way ticket to Ohio. If he comes back, he'll regret it. I turned to face him fully. How did you know all that about him? The warrant? The ex-girlfriend? I told you I had people looking into him. They're thorough. He studied my face, concern replacing the cold efficiency he'd shown Dylan. Are you all right? I don't know. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I thought you'd handled this already. You said he wouldn't be a problem. I thought I had. His investigator found a lead I didn't anticipate. Christopher's jaw tightened. It won't happen again. I'm doubling security on this building, and I'm assigning someone to Olivia's school. This is my fault. The realization hit hard. I brought this into your life. The danger, the complications. Megan. He caught my face between his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. You brought nothing but light into my life. Dylan is a problem I'm equipped to handle. Don't apologize for needing help. But this is what you do, isn't it? You solve problems with threats and force and resources most people don't have. And I'm just one more problem on your list. You're not a problem. His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones, the gesture achingly tender. You're the woman I can't stop thinking about. The one I want to protect because the thought of anything happening to you makes me lose my mind. The one who plays piano like she's pouring out her soul and makes me believe in things I thought I'd buried with my sister. My breath caught. Christopher, I love you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I've been in love with you since the night your daughter asked me to stop you from crying. Maybe before. And I know this is complicated, and probably inadvisable and definitely breaks about a dozen rules I've set for myself. But I don't care. I love you, Megan Foster, and I need you to know that before anything else happens. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unexpected. This is crazy. We barely know each other. I know you cry in the bathroom so your daughter won't hear. I know you play Chopin when you're sad and Debussy when you're hopeful. I know you sacrifice everything for Olivia without a second thought. I know you're stronger than you believe, and braver than you realize. His forehead touched mine. I know enough. I'm scared. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I'm scared of needing you this much. Of what happens if this doesn't work. Of losing the little independence I have left. Then be scared. But be scared with me. Not alone. He kissed my forehead, then each cheek, tasting my tears. Let me love you, Megan. Let me take care of you and Olivia the way you deserve. Not because you're weak or incapable, but because you shouldn't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. I looked up at him. This dangerous man who'd inserted himself into my life and refused to leave, who'd paid for my daughter's treatment and protected us from threats I couldn't handle alone, who'd just confessed his love on a Manhattan sidewalk with all the sincerity of someone unused to vulnerability. I love you too, I heard myself say. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And it terrifies me. His smile transformed his face, chasing away the cold authority, and revealing something warm and genuine beneath. Good. We can be terrified together. He kissed me then, right there on the sidewalk with his security watching and pedestrians passing by. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally secure in a way I'd never experienced before. When we finally broke apart, Christopher kept his arm around me as we walked into the building. Sarah was waiting upstairs with Olivia, and I needed to make sure my daughter hadn't been frightened by Dylan's appearance. But as we rode the elevator up, Christopher's hand in mine, I felt the weight I'd been carrying begin to lift. Dylan was gone. Olivia was safe, and the man beside me loved me despite every reason why he shouldn't. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new challenges, new reasons to be afraid. But for tonight, I had this. And maybe, just maybe, it would be sufficient. The explosion happened on a Friday night, 3 weeks after Dylan had left New York. I was at the Onyx playing for the regular evening crowd, working through a Rachmaninoff piece that required my full concentration. Christopher was in his office upstairs, handling business I didn't ask about. Olivia was home with Sarah, safe in our apartment. Then the world erupted in sound and chaos. The blast came from somewhere outside the building, powerful enough to rattle the windows and send several glasses crashing from the bar. The music died instantly as everyone reacted, patrons diving under tables, staff rushing toward exits. Training I didn't know I possessed took over. I stayed low, scanning for Christopher even as Marco appeared beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Stay down. Don't move until I say so." More security poured into the lounge from hidden positions, weapons visible now in a way they never were during normal operations. Through the confusion, I saw Christopher descending the stairs, his expression cold and focused in a way that terrified me more than the explosion had. He reached me in seconds, pulling me up and toward the back hallway. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." "What happened?" "Car bomb. Across the street." His jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. It was meant as a message. A message from who? The Ndrangheta. Viktor Volkov's people. He was already moving, pulling me toward the service exit where a car waited, engine running. "Get in. We're getting you somewhere safe." "Christopher, wait." "Olivia." Panic seized my throat. Is she okay? Is Sarah with her? He had his phone out before I finished speaking, pressing it to his ear while opening the car door. "Marco, confirm that Foster's apartment is secure. I want eyes on the daughter and the sitter now." We climbed into the back seat, and the car pulled away from the curb immediately. Christopher kept his arm around me, solid and reassuring even as his attention remained on the phone. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, he nodded. "They're both fine. Building security has been doubled, and I'm sending additional people to your floor." He finally looked at me, his expression softening slightly. "Olivia's safe, Megan. I promised you that, and I meant it. This is because of me." The realization hit with crushing weight. Because you helped me. Because you protected us from Dylan. Now your business is under attack. This has nothing to do with you. Christopher's voice was firm. This is about territory and power, and old grudges that predate you by years. Victor has been looking for an excuse to test my boundaries. He chose tonight. But the timing. I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence in Christopher's life had somehow catalyzed this violence. 3 weeks after Dylan, and suddenly your club is being bombed? The timing is Victor's miscalculation, not your fault. He pulled me closer, his hand cupping the back of my head. "Listen to me carefully. You are not responsible for the actions of violent men. You didn't cause this, and you won't be a casualty of it. I won't allow it." The car pulled up to our building, where I could see at least 6 of Christopher's security positioned at various points. The doorman looked shaken but unhurt. Christopher guided me inside and up to the apartment, where Sarah met us at the door. Olivia clutched against her side. "Mommy!" Olivia ran to me, and I scooped her up, holding her tight enough that she squirmed. We heard a loud noise. Sarah said it was probably just construction, but it was really loud. "Just an accident, sweetheart. Everything's okay." I looked at Sarah over Olivia's head. "Thank you for keeping her calm." Of course. Sarah's eyes were wide, and I could see she understood this was far more serious than construction. "Should I stay?" Christopher answered before I could. "That would be appreciated. I need to speak with Megan privately." After getting Olivia settled in her room with a movie and reassuring her that everything was fine, I joined Christopher in the kitchen. He stood by the window, phone in hand, speaking rapid Italian to someone on the other end. When he saw me, he ended the call. "I need you and Olivia to leave the city for a few days. Maybe a week." His tone left no room for argument. "I have a house upstate, completely secure, staffed with people I trust. You'll be safe there while I handle this situation." "Handle it how?" I crossed my arms, fear turning into anger. "By escalating? By doing whatever you're planning that will get more people hurt? By doing what's necessary to ensure Victor understands that attacking my interests has consequences?" His expression had gone hard again, the warmth from earlier buried beneath layers of cold calculation. "This isn't negotiable, Megan. You and Olivia leave tomorrow morning. You're sending us away so you can start a war. I'm sending you away so you won't be caught in the crossfire of a war that's already started." He moved toward me, his hands finding my shoulders. "Do you understand what that car bomb means? It means Victor knows how important you are to me. It means he sees you as leverage, as a weakness he can exploit. And I will not give him that opportunity. So I'm a liability now." Bitterness crept into my voice. "Something that needs to be hidden away while you handle business. You're the woman I love, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if that means keeping you away from me for a while." His fingers tightened slightly on my shoulders. "I've already lost my sister to circumstances I couldn't control. I won't lose you to circumstances I can control." The raw pain in his voice made my anger deflate. I reached up and covered his hands with mine. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. "What I should have done the first time Victor disrespected my territory. I'm going to remind him why people fear the Santoro name." He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me. "But I need to know you're safe first. Please, Megan, go upstate. Give me a week to resolve this." I thought about Olivia, about the life we'd built here, about the treatment schedule that couldn't be interrupted. She has a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, her second treatment dose. "I'll arrange for Dr. Reeves to meet you at the house. The treatment can happen there." He pulled back enough to see my face. "I've thought of everything. All you have to do is say yes." What choice did I really have? Stay here and risk Olivia being caught in whatever violence Christopher was planning? Pretend that car bomb was an isolated incident that wouldn't be followed by something worse? I'd learned enough about this world to know that attacks like tonight's didn't end with a single explosion. They escalated, and they targeted whoever seemed most vulnerable. "1 week?" I agreed finally. "But you stay in contact. I want to know you're all right. I promise." He kissed me, hard and desperate, like he was memorizing the taste of me. "I love you. Remember that, no matter what you hear over the next few days." The implication in those words sent ice through my veins. "Christopher, what are you planning?" "Nothing you need to know the details of." He released me and stepped back, his expression closing off. "Pack what you and Olivia need. The car will be here at 6 tomorrow morning. Sarah will go with you if you want the company." That night, I lay awake listening to Olivia breathe in the next room, and Christopher move around the apartment making phone calls in Italian that I tried not to translate. When he finally came to bed near 3 in the morning, I held him tight, feeling the tension in every muscle. "Don't get yourself killed," I whispered into the darkness. "That's not the plan." His hand stroked through my hair, soothing. "Sleep, love. Tomorrow will be easier than tonight." He was wrong about that. Tomorrow was worse, because it meant leaving him behind to face whatever consequences came from declaring war on the Ndrangheta. But I didn't argue. I packed our things, got Olivia ready with promises of a surprise vacation, and climbed into the black SUV that waited at exactly 6 o'clock. Christopher kissed me goodbye in the lobby, in front of his security and the doorman and anyone who might be watching. A claiming kiss, possessive and public, that marked me as his in a way that couldn't be misunderstood. 1 week, he said against my lips. Then I'm bringing you home. The drive upstate took 3 hours. The house Christopher had mentioned turned out to be a compound, nestled in the Catskills with views of mountains and forests that seemed impossibly far from Manhattan's chaos. Staff greeted us warmly, showing us to rooms that were comfortable without being ostentatious. Olivia was delighted by the change of scenery, running through rooms and exploring with Sarah trailing behind her. I stood at the window of my assigned bedroom and stared at the trees, wondering what Christopher was doing right now. Planning? Meeting with associates? Preparing for violence I couldn't even imagine? My phone buzzed with a text. You made it safely? Yes, the house is beautiful. Olivia loves it. Good. I'll call when I can. Don't worry. Don't worry. As if that was possible when the man I loved was about to do something that might get him killed or imprisoned or worse. I set the phone down and went to find Olivia, focusing on being present for her while my mind stayed in New York with Christopher. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Christopher called twice a day, his conversations brief and carefully neutral, clearly aware that phones weren't secure. He never mentioned specifics, never told me what was happening, but I heard the exhaustion in his voice, the strain he tried to hide. Dr. Reeves did arrive on Tuesday as promised, bringing everything needed for Olivia's treatment. The infusion went smoothly, and Olivia tolerated it even better than the first time. Small victories in the midst of larger chaos. On Thursday, I woke to find news reports about a warehouse fire in Red Hook. Suspected arson. No casualties. Building owned by a company with ties to organized crime. I stared at the screen of my phone, knowing without confirmation that Christopher was responsible. Friday brought reports of arrests. 6 men associated with the Ndrangheta, taken into custody on various charges. The news didn't mention Christopher, but I knew his fingerprints were all over it somehow. Saturday, the phone calls stopped. I tried calling Christopher and got voicemail. Tried texting and got no response. Panic built in my chest. Visions of him hurt or captured or dead filling my mind. Marco wouldn't answer either. The security at the compound assured me everything was fine, that silence was expected during certain operations, but their reassurances did nothing to calm my fear. Sunday morning, a car pulled up the drive. Christopher emerged, looking exhausted but whole, and relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. I ran to him, and he caught me, holding on like he'd been drowning and I was air. "It's over," he said into my hair. "Victor and his lieutenants have been neutralized. The Ndrangheta is pulling back from New York. You can come home." I pulled back to look at his face, searching for signs of injury. "Are you hurt?" "No. Tired, but not hurt." He cupped my face gently. "I kept my promise. I handled it. And now you're safe. What did you do?" I needed to know. Needed to understand what he'd sacrificed to protect us. What needed to be done. His expression was carefully controlled. Victor tried to expand into territory he had no claim to. I reminded him of boundaries. We reached an understanding. The careful phrasing told me everything I needed to know. Blood had been spilled, though Christopher had been careful to keep his own hands clean enough to avoid legal consequences. Men had been hurt, or killed, or driven from the city. And he'd done it all to keep Olivia and me safe. "Thank you," I said quietly, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "You don't thank me for this." His voice was rough. "You never thank me for violence, even when it's necessary." But I did thank him, in the way I held him, in the way I kissed him when Olivia wasn't looking, in the way I chose to stay despite knowing exactly what kind of man he was and what he was capable of, because love didn't exist in neat categories. It didn't separate the good from the bad, the acceptable from the unconscionable. It simply existed, messy and complicated and necessary, binding us together through choices both of us would have to live with. We went home that afternoon, back to Manhattan and the life we'd built together. And if I woke sometimes in the night thinking about car bombs and warehouse fires, Christopher was there to hold me until the fear passed. 1 week had changed everything and nothing. The threats were handled, but new ones would eventually emerge. For now, though, we had peace. And I'd learned to take peace wherever I could find it. 3 months after the warehouse fire and the arrest that followed, life had settled into something that resembled normalcy. Dylan hadn't resurfaced. Christopher's people still checked in from time to time, but every report said the same thing. My ex-husband was still in Ohio, too busy untangling his own legal problems to come hunting for us again. Sometimes I still woke, certain I heard his footsteps in the hallway, but the panic faded faster now, replaced by the quiet knowledge that he was far away, and we were, finally, hard to reach. Olivia's treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. Her inflammation markers had dropped to near normal levels, and Dr. Reeves was cautiously using the word remission in our conversations. She'd gained weight, her cheeks filling out with healthy color. She ran and played without exhaustion, attended school without missing days for illness. She was, for the first time in 2 years, a normal 7-year-old child. I'd continued playing at the Onyx and at Christopher's private events, but something had shifted in how I approached the work. I no longer felt like I was just surviving, trading dignity for survival. Instead, I'd begun to see myself as Christopher saw me, a talented musician whose skill had value beyond mere functionality. He'd arranged for me to give a small recital at a gallery opening last month, my first public performance in years that wasn't background music. The response had been overwhelming, and I'd fielded 3 offers for future performances at venues that had nothing to do with Christopher's business. For the first time since Olivia's diagnosis, I could envision a future that extended beyond the next medical bill, the next crisis, the next impossible choice. I could imagine building a career again, establishing myself as a pianist in my own right, providing for Olivia through my talent rather than through dependence on anyone else. Christopher and I had fallen into a rhythm that worked despite its unconventionality. He spent most nights at our apartment, usually arriving after Olivia was asleep, but present for breakfast before she left for school. She'd grown attached to him in a way that both warmed and terrified me. She called him Chris now, asked his opinion on homework assignments, showed him her art projects with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved only for me. One morning in early February, I woke to find him already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in hand. The early morning light coming through the windows cast his features in sharp relief, emphasizing the tension in his jaw. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately alert. He set the phone down and turned to face me. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer." My stomach nodded. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least, I hope it's not." He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles against my palm. "I want you and Olivia to move in with me. Officially, permanently. Not just you staying at my place sometimes, but actually living together as a family." The words hung in the air between us. I sat up, pulling the sheet around myself, kneading the barrier while I processed what he was asking. "Christopher, we've only been together for 5 months. I know how long it's been. I've counted every day." His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. "But I also know that what we have isn't typical. We didn't meet under normal circumstances. We didn't date conventionally. And we've already weathered crises that would break most relationships. So, why are we pretending that we need to follow some standard timeline? Because Olivia is involved? Because moving too fast could hurt her if this doesn't work out? And what about moving too slow? What about teaching her that love requires constant hedging, constant doubt, constant testing before commitment?" He moved closer, his free hand cupping my face. "I love you, Megan. I love Olivia. I want to wake up with you every morning, not just the mornings when it's convenient. I want to be there for her school plays and doctor's appointments and bad dreams. I want to be a family, not just 2 people who care about each other, but keep 1 foot out the door." Tears pricked my eyes. "You're asking for everything. I'm asking for what I should have asked for weeks ago." He kissed my forehead gently. "Move in with me. Let me be the father figure Olivia deserves. Let me take care of both of you. Not because you need taking care of, but because I need to be part of your lives in every way that matters." Where would we live? The practical question came automatically, my mind grasping for concrete details to anchor the enormity of what he was proposing. "I have a townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, 4 bedrooms, a garden, a neighborhood with good schools. It's been sitting mostly empty for 2 years because I've been living at the Onyx more often than not. But it could be a home, if you want it to be." I thought about the apartment we currently occupied, the beautiful space that had never quite felt like ours, because it belonged to Christopher's world, not mine. And I thought about what it would mean to choose a home together, to commit to building something permanent. "Can we see it first, before I give you an answer?" Relief flooded his expression. "Of course, whenever you want." We went that afternoon, the 3 of us. Olivia bounced excitedly in the backseat of the car, asking 1,000 questions about the new house, whether she'd have her own room, if there would be space for all her art supplies. Christopher answered each question patiently, his hand resting on my knee as Marco drove us across the bridge into Brooklyn. The townhouse was beautiful in a way that took my breath away. Red brick facade, wrought iron railings, a small front garden that would bloom with flowers in spring. Inside, hardwood floors gleamed in afternoon sunlight that poured through tall windows. The rooms were spacious, but not ostentatiously large, furnished with pieces that suggested someone had actually thought about comfort and livability rather than just displaying wealth. Olivia claimed the bedroom with the window seat immediately, declaring it perfect for reading. I walked through the space slowly, touching surfaces, imagining our lives unfolding in these rooms. The kitchen was modern and functional, perfect for the cooking I'd stopped doing in recent months. The master bedroom had an attached bathroom with a clawfoot tub that made me think of long soaks after stressful days. "What do you think?" Christopher asked, finding me in what could be a study or music room. Empty, except for a piano positioned near the window. "It's perfect." I ran my fingers across the piano keys, not pressing hard enough to make sound. Too perfect, maybe. Like it's waiting for us to ruin it, or waiting for us to make it real. He moved behind me, his arms circling my waist. "This house has been empty too long. It needs voices, laughter, life. It needs you and Olivia." I leaned back against him, letting myself imagine mornings in that kitchen, evenings in that garden, nights in that bedroom. What happens when your business interferes? When you have to disappear for a week to handle situations like Victor? When Olivia asks questions about what you do and I don't have good answers? Then we deal with those situations as they come. Together. His lips brushed against my temple. "I'm not asking you to pretend I'm something I'm not. I'm asking you to accept all of me, the good and the complicated and the dangerous, the same way I accept all of you. The strength and the fear and the fierce love you have for your daughter." I turned in his arms to face him. "If we do this, I need one promise from you. Anything. That you'll always come home. No matter what business you're handling, no matter what dangers you face, you promise me that you'll do everything in your power to come back to us." My voice cracked slightly, because Olivia has already lost one father figure. She can't lose another. His expression grew solemn. "I promise. I will always find my way home to you." We moved in 3 weeks later. Marco and several others helped transport our belongings from the Upper West Side apartment, though we didn't have much to bring. Most of what we'd accumulated there belonged to Christopher anyway. But my piano from the Onyx came with us, positioned in the music room where sunlight would touch it every morning. Olivia's art supplies found a home in a closet that had been converted into a studio space. My mother's jewelry box, the one thing I'd managed to keep through all our moves and fresh starts, sat on the dresser in the master bedroom. The first night in the townhouse, Christopher made dinner while Olivia and I unpacked kitchen boxes. It was domestic and ordinary and perfect in its simplicity. We ate pasta at the dining room table, Olivia chattering about her new room and the park she'd spotted 2 blocks away. After dinner, Christopher helped with her bedtime routine, reading 3 chapters of her current favorite book while I cleaned up. When he finally joined me in the kitchen, I was washing dishes by hand, despite the perfectly functional dishwasher, needing something to do with my hands. "She's asleep," he said, moving to help dry the plates I'd washed. "Asked me to tell you goodnight. She's happy here." I glanced at him, this man who'd inserted himself into our lives and refused to leave. "You're good with her. She makes it easy. She's smart, funny, creative. Everything a kid should be." He set down the dish towel and turned me to face him. "Thank you for giving me this. For trusting me with both of you. Thank you for not giving up when I tried to push you away." He kissed me then, soft and sweet. The kind of kiss that promised more, but was content to simply be for now. When we broke apart, I realized I wasn't crying. For the first time in years, I was completely at peace. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Christopher still handled business that I didn't ask about, still disappeared occasionally for meetings that ended late and left him tense. But he always came home, usually with some small gift for Olivia, a book or art supplies or the fancy hot chocolate she loved. He attended her school's spring musical, sitting in the audience beside me and clapping louder than anyone else when she sang her solo. He learned to braid her hair when I was running late for a lesson. He taught her to play chess and lost gracefully when she started beating him. With me, he was patient and attentive, and surprisingly romantic for someone whose daily business involved threats and violence. He took me to concerts at Carnegie Hall, to gallery openings, to quiet dinners at restaurants that had nothing to do with his empire. He listened when I talked about wanting to perform more, about maybe teaching at a conservatory someday. He encouraged the dreams I'd buried under years of survival and fear. One Saturday afternoon in early May, we were in the garden. Christopher was teaching Olivia how to plant tomatoes while I watched from the back steps, coffee in hand. The spring sun was warm, the air filled with birdsong and Olivia's laughter as she got dirt all over herself. And I realized, with sudden clarity, that I had stopped waiting for disaster. For so long, happiness had been temporary, borrowed, something that would inevitably be ripped away. But watching Christopher patiently guide Olivia's hands as she patted soil around a seedling, seeing the genuine affection in his expression, I finally believed this might last. "Mom," Olivia called. "Chris says we can plant flowers too. Can we get roses?" "Whatever flowers you want, sweetheart." Christopher looked up and caught my eye, his expression warm and content in a way I'd never seen on anyone before. He mouthed, "I love you." And I mouthed it back, the words as natural as breathing now. That evening, after Olivia was in bed, Christopher and I sat in the garden with glasses of wine, watching the sun set behind the neighboring buildings. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. "Getting involved with us? Taking on all the complications we brought into your life?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret a lot of things in my life, Megan. Choices I made, people I hurt, opportunities I missed. But you and Olivia? Never. Not for a second. Even though we changed everything, especially because you changed everything." He pulled me closer, tucking me against his side. "Before you, I was going through motions, building an empire that would outlast me, but never give me anything worth living for. You gave me purpose beyond power. You gave me family." I tilted my head up to kiss him, tasting wine and promises on his lips. "We should probably talk about the future at some point. About what happens when Olivia gets older and starts asking harder questions. About whether we want to make this official in some legal sense. Are you proposing to me, Miss Foster?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes held genuine hope. "Maybe I am. Eventually." I smiled against his mouth. "But not tonight. Tonight I just want to sit here with you and be grateful for this moment." "I can do that." He settled back, holding me close while the last light faded from the sky. "I can do that for as long as you'll let me." And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not escaping Dylan, not securing Olivia's treatment, not even finding love in the most unlikely of places. The real victory was learning to accept happiness without constantly looking over my shoulder for the disaster that would end it. Some threats would always linger on the horizon. Christopher's world was dangerous, and choosing to be part of it meant accepting risks I couldn't fully control. But we'd face those together, as a family, with all the strength that came from being truly seen and loved. For tonight, for this moment, that was more than enough. It was everything.